Elliot Carter was just another 10-year-old boy from Denver. He had school, friends, and a love for building model spaceships in his room. He had no idea that across the galaxy, empires would soon rise and fall because of him. The alert triggered at exactly 2:17 a.m. Earth Standard Time. Deep within the Sol System's orbital network, a routine scan of genetic markers flagged an anomaly so improbable that the system AI hesitated before escalating it to Priority 1. A direct line to the Galactic Council opened automatically. Within minutes, hundreds of intelligence networks and surveillance programs converged on a single name: Elliot Carter. Human, age 10. Genetic match to the long-extinct Celestial Imperium's ruling bloodline. The news spread like wildfire. By morning, half the galactic aristocracy knew what had been found. The other half was trying to suppress it. The Celestial Imperium had been the most powerful empire in known history. It had ruled the stars for millennia before collapsing in blood and fire. The last confirmed descendant had been executed over 5,000 years ago. Or so they thought. Now a child on an obscure planet carried the very DNA that could reignite wars long thought buried. On Earth, the Carter household woke up to what seemed like an ordinary day. Elliot's mother, Julia, was preparing breakfast. His father, Michael, was checking news updates on his tablet, frowning at reports of an unusual increase in deep space traffic near the outer colonies. Elliot himself was groggily dragging himself out of bed, unaware that somewhere beyond the sky, warships had already begun moving toward Earth. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of an emergency broadcast. The television flickered, cutting from the morning news to a government-issued alert. Unscheduled planetary lockdown. All spaceport travel restricted. The kind of announcement that only happened when Earth's defense network detected something serious. Elliot's father barely had time to react before a deep hum rattled the windows. A shadow passed over the house. Not a cloud. Something enormous. They ran outside, along with dozens of other neighbors. A ship the size of a city had descended, hovering just above the atmosphere. It wasn't human. It bore the insignia of the Galactic Council. And it had come for one reason. Within minutes, heavily armored figures touched down in unmarked shuttles. The street filled with murmurs. People whispered about first contact, about diplomacy. But Julia Carter instinctively grabbed her son and pulled him close. She knew. This wasn't diplomacy. This was an extraction. A voice, cold and unwavering, broadcasted through the settlement. By order of the Galactic Council, we request the presence of Elliot Carter. Panic set in. Neighbors turned to one another, whispering. Elliot himself was frozen. He didn't understand. Why would real aliens, know his name? His father was already moving, placing himself between his family and the approaching soldiers. No, Michael Carter said firmly. Not happening. The lead officer, a tall figure in silver battle armor, didn't even hesitate. Your son is of extreme galactic importance. We do not seek conflict, but he must come with us. Julia tightened her grip on Elliot. You're not taking my son? For the briefest moment, there was silence. Then, the officer raised one gloved hand. The moment his fingers twitched, every light in the neighborhood died. A pulse of energy knocked out every piece of technology for blocks. A silent show of force. When he spoke again, there was no more diplomacy in his tone. Then Earth itself will face the consequences. Above them, the great warship adjusted its position. Defense satellites across the planet began activating, recognizing a potential threat. In the council chambers across the stars, unseen hands moved to decide whether humanity would be allowed to keep their newfound heir or if the entire planet would pay the price. Elliot Carter stood at the center of it all, his heart pounding. His life as he knew it was over. The world changed overnight. Earth was no longer just another backwater planet in the grand scale of the galaxy. It had become the focal point of something far greater. Governments scrambled to make sense of the situation. News anchors speculated wildly. The internet erupted with theories, conspiracies, and panic. But for Elliot Carter, none of that mattered. He was locked inside a classified underground facility, guarded by men and women whose only job was to ensure that he stayed alive. The room was cold and sterile, nothing like his bedroom back home. There were no posters of starships on the walls, no half-built models on the desk, no soft bed to crawl into when the world became too much. Just metal, reinforced glass, and the constant presence of heavily armed guards standing outside his door. His parents were being held separately, somewhere within the facility. He hadn't seen them since they were taken. A man in a dark suit entered, his footsteps sharp against the floor. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. His presence alone screamed authority. "You have no idea what you are, do you?" the man asked, his voice calm but edged with something unreadable. Elliot shook his head, too overwhelmed to speak. The man sighed and placed a sleek device on the table between them. It flickered to life, projecting a rotating image of an unfamiliar crest. Golden wings wrapped around a star, surrounded by intricate symbols that meant nothing to Elliot. 5,000 years ago, the Celestial Imperium ruled the known galaxy. It was vast, powerful, untouchable. Until it fell. Civil war, betrayal, destruction on a scale humanity can't even comprehend. The bloodline was wiped out. Or so we thought. The man tapped the device, and the crest disappeared, replaced by a genetic readout with highlighted sequences. Your DNA matches the royal line perfectly. Not just a distant relation, a direct descendant. Elliot's mouth went dry. That doesn't make any sense. It makes perfect sense, the man countered. Because it means someone hid you here. Buried your bloodline on Earth, away from those who would have hunted you down. And now the secret is out. The weight of it crushed Elliot's chest. He wasn't just some kid anymore. He was something else entirely. Something that people were willing to kill for. "They want me," he whispered. "They want control," the man corrected. "Your bloodline is more than a symbol. It's a claim. The moment you're recognized, entire factions will rise to support or destroy you. Some will want you dead. Others will want to use you as a puppet. And some," he leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Some will try to take Earth for themselves, just to control you." Elliot felt sick. His whole life had been reduced to a political game he didn't understand. What happens now? The man sat back, considering his next words carefully. The Galactic Council is already debating whether Earth should be allowed to keep you. Some say we're too primitive, too unpredictable. They argue that humanity doesn't deserve to hold something so powerful. His expression darkened. And there are whispers of old enemies returning. Forces that have been waiting for something like this. If they believe you could bring back the Imperium, they will come. Elliot swallowed hard. "And if we don't let them take me?" The man didn't smile. "Then Earth stands alone." The air felt too thin. Elliot's mind raced, trying to make sense of something too big for him to grasp. He had always dreamed of space, of adventure, of something greater than himself. But not like this. Not as a prize to be fought over. Not as the reason his home might burn. A distant tremor shook the walls. Alarms flared to life. The guards outside the door snapped to attention. The man in the suit exhaled sharply and stood. "They're here." The first explosion rocked the facility, sending a deep tremor through the walls. Elliot barely had time to react before the lights flickered, alarms shrieked, and the entire underground bunker shuddered under the force of an impact. The guards outside his door sprang into motion, weapons raised, barking commands into their comms. Elliot's heart pounded. He didn't understand what was happening, but the fear in the eyes of the hardened soldiers told him everything he needed to know. Someone had come for him. The man in the suit pressed a finger to his earpiece, his expression darkening. "Breach in Sector 7. We have hostiles inside the perimeter." The words barely left his mouth before the reinforced door exploded inward. The blast sent Elliot tumbling backward, his ears ringing, his vision blurring. Through the smoke, figures in sleek, unfamiliar armor poured into the room, moving with precision and lethal intent. The guards opened fire, energy rounds illuminating the chaos. But the attackers moved like phantoms, cutting through the defense in seconds. A hand grabbed Elliot's wrist, yanking him back. The man in the suit, face streaked with blood from the explosion, shoved him toward a hidden exit behind a collapsing section of the wall. Run? Elliot didn't hesitate. His legs carried him forward before his mind caught up. The corridor ahead was narrow, barely illuminated by emergency lighting. The sounds of battle raged behind him, screams, gunfire, the unmistakable hum of advanced weaponry cutting through reinforced walls. He forced himself to move faster. A voice crackled over the facility speakers. Cold, smooth, undeniably inhuman. Elliot Carter, surrender now, and we will spare your world. He didn't stop running. The corridor led to a secured hangar, a massive underground bay filled with experimental ships. Engineers and pilots scrambled, desperate to evacuate as explosions rocked the structure. A sleek black vessel, smaller than the others, was already primed for launch. A woman in military fatigues spotted him and swore under her breath. Get him on that ship now. Strong hands grabbed him, pulling him up the ramp. The interior was dark, humming with power. Elliot barely had time to process what was happening before the ship lurched, engines igniting, thrusters roaring. Through the viewport, he saw the facility collapsing in on itself. The attacking force had been relentless, methodical. Whoever they were, they hadn't come just to capture him. They had come to erase any resistance. The pilot's voice cut through the tension. We've got multiple hostiles in pursuit. Hold on. The ship jolted, accelerating at a speed Elliot had never experienced. His stomach twisted, his vision blurred, but he fought to stay conscious. Through the viewport, streaks of light and fire filled the sky. Alien ships, sleek and angular, swarmed after them, weapons charging. Who are they? Elliot managed to choke out. The pilot's hands moved across the controls, weaving the ship through incoming fire. They call themselves the Veilborn, ancient enemies of the Imperium. We thought they were gone. Her jaw tightened. Looks like they've been waiting for you. The words sent ice through Elliot's veins. He wasn't just a curiosity to the galaxy. He was a threat, a symbol, a spark that could reignite wars buried under millennia of dust. The ship shook as enemy fire grazed the hull. A warning shot. The comm crackled to life again, the same cold voice as before. Last chance, heir of the Imperium. Surrender, and we will let your world live. Elliot looked out at the stars, the vast unknown stretching before him. He had never asked for this. He had never wanted to be anything more than a kid from Earth. But the universe had decided otherwise. His hands clenched into fists. His heartbeat steadied. No, he whispered. The pilot grinned. Good answer. The engines flared, and the ship vanished into the void. The stars blurred as the ship tore through space, engines burning hotter than they were ever meant to. The pilot pushed the craft to its limits, weaving through incoming fire as the Veilborn ships pursued with ruthless precision. Elliot gripped the armrest, his knuckles white. Every second that passed, he felt the weight of something far greater than himself pressing down on his chest. He wasn't just running. He was dragging the entire fate of his world behind him. They're gaining, a voice shouted from the cockpit. The pilot, a hardened woman with short-cropped hair and a scar running across her jaw, didn't flinch. They won't catch us, she said, but there was a flicker of doubt in her voice. The ship bucked as another blast grazed the rear thrusters, warning systems blaring in protest. Elliot's breath came fast and shallow. They were running out of time. Then a new voice crackled through the comms, deep and commanding. Unknown vessel, identify yourself. This is the UES Vanguard. You are entering Terran Defense Grid. The pilot slammed a switch, opening a direct line. "This is Commander Run Halstead of the Blackbird. We are carrying a high-value asset. We need immediate support." There was a pause. Then a new voice, calm and clipped. "Commander Halstead, your transponder is not recognized. If you do not transmit clearance codes within the next 10 seconds, you will be treated as hostile." Before she could respond, the Veil-born ships opened fire again, sending the ship into a violent spin. Run swore, struggling to stabilize their course. Elliot was thrown sideways, barely catching himself against the bulkhead. "This is a Terran vessel," Run shouted into the comms. "We have the boy." The air. Silence. Then everything changed. The black void ahead of them ripped open. A dozen human warships emerged from the darkness, their hulls gleaming in the light of distant stars. Their weapons powered up in unison, locking onto the pursuing enemy. The Vanguard's captain spoke again, this time with ice in his tone. "We see them. All units, weapons free." A wall of fire erupted as Earth's defense fleet unleashed everything they had. The Veilborn, so sure of their victory, hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was all that was needed. The first enemy ship shattered under the impact of kinetic rounds. Another was torn apart by missile fire. The rest broke formation, scrambling to retreat, but the Terran warships pursued without mercy. Elliot barely understood what he was witnessing. Humanity had been a minor player in the galactic stage, overlooked, ignored. But now they were fighting back. Run pushed the ship forward, angling toward the massive flagship at the center of the fleet. "Hold on," she muttered, guiding them into the docking bay. The moment they landed, the ship's ramp lowered, and armed soldiers poured inside. They weren't here for a diplomatic escort. They were securing a battlefield prize. A man in a crisp uniform stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Elliot Carter." Elliot forced himself to stand straighter, even though his legs still felt like jelly. "Yeah." The officer studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You don't belong to the stars. You belong to us." Elliot swallowed hard. He had spent his whole life dreaming of space, of adventure, of something bigger than himself. Now the entire galaxy had its eyes on him, and Earth had made its choice. They would not give him up. They would fight for him, and the universe would learn what it meant to challenge humanity. Elliot stood at the heart of the Vanguard, surrounded by officers and soldiers who had no idea what to do with him. He wasn't a diplomat, a warrior, or even someone who understood the stakes of what was happening. He was just a boy from Earth. But none of that mattered anymore. A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the command room. It showed the aftermath of the battle, the wreckage of Veil-born ships floating lifeless in space, human warships standing vigilant over Earth. But it also showed something far worse. More ships were coming. A fleet, massive beyond comprehension, was moving toward the Sol system. Veil-born, mercenaries, opportunists, all converging on a single point in the galaxy. Elliot Carter. Admiral David Reese, the man who had greeted him upon landing, folded his arms. His expression was unreadable, but there was an edge to his voice. "They're not backing down." A woman in a dark uniform stepped forward, her voice clipped and efficient. "We've intercepted communications. The Galactic Council is still debating whether we have the right to keep him. But certain factions have already decided. They don't care about legalities. They see him as a threat to the balance of power." Elliot clenched his fists. "So what do we do?" Admiral Reese looked at him, truly looked at him, as if trying to decide whether he was speaking to a boy or to something more. "We show them why humanity is not to be underestimated." A ripple of energy coursed through the ship as it prepared for full combat readiness. Officers moved with purpose, issuing orders, calculating battle formations, ensuring that Earth's defenses were ready for what was coming. The Terran defense fleet wasn't the largest in the galaxy, nor the most advanced. But they had something no other species had. They had resolve. Elliot swallowed. "And if they come in numbers we can't handle?" Reese exhaled sharply. Then we fight until the last ship burns. The weight of it hit Elliot all at once. They weren't just protecting him. They were preparing to fight a war for him. Earth was ready to stand alone against the entire galaxy if that's what it took. But then something unexpected happened. A new signal cut through the comm channels, overriding all encrypted frequencies. It wasn't from Earth. It wasn't from the Veilborn. It was ancient, laced with an authority so absolute that it made even seasoned officers flinch. The holographic display flickered again, revealing a shadowed figure clad in regal, battle-worn armor. The air itself seemed to still. The lost heir of the celestial Imperium lives, the figure said, his voice deep and resonant. And so does the Imperium's will. A shiver ran through the room. Whispers spread. The Imperium had fallen thousands of years ago. Its armies had been scattered, its rulers wiped from existence. And yet, here was a voice claiming otherwise. Reese's expression darkened. Identify yourself. The figure tilted his head slightly. I am High Marshal Kaler of the Exiled Legions. We have waited in the shadows, in the void between worlds, for the return of the rightful heir. His eyes locked onto Elliot, piercing and unwavering. We come not as conquerors, but as those who swore an oath. If the blood of the Imperium still flows, then its throne has not yet turned to dust. Elliot's breath caught. You're saying you're here to help? Kaler nodded. I am saying that the Imperium is not dead. It only needed a reason to rise again. The room erupted into chaos. Officers shouted, strategists scrambled to understand what was happening. If this was true, if an entire hidden force still existed in the galaxy, then the balance of power had just shifted. Admiral Reese turned to Elliot. Looks like you have a choice to make, kid. The weight of history pressed down on him. He had always wanted to see the stars. He had just never imagined that when he finally did, the stars would be looking back at him. The galaxy had come for him. Now it was time to decide if he would come for the galaxy. The universe held its breath. Elliot Carter, a boy who only days ago had been nothing more than another kid from Earth, now stood at the center of a galactic storm. The Veilborn were coming to claim him. The Galactic Council debated whether humanity had the right to keep him. And now, from the depths of history itself, the exiled legions had returned, swearing fealty to the bloodline that had once ruled the stars. The weight of it pressed down on him like a mountain. He was 10 years old. He shouldn't have had to make decisions like this. But no one else could. The war was coming. Elliot looked up at the towering figure of High Marshal Kaler, whose eyes burned with the fire of a man who had waited a lifetime for this moment. The Imperium was not dead. It had endured in the forgotten places of the galaxy, waiting for an heir to rise. You swear loyalty to my bloodline? Elliot asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Kaler lowered his head slightly. Not just to your bloodline. To you? Elliot swallowed hard. He glanced at Admiral Reese, who stood rigid, arms folded, waiting to see what he would do. The Terran fleet was prepared to fight to the last ship, but they were still outnumbered. If they fought alone, they would lose. But if the exiled legions stood with them, Elliot took a deep breath. Then I swear something, too. I don't want a throne. I don't want power. But I won't let the galaxy decide my fate. Or Earth's. His fists clenched. We stand together. Kaler's eyes gleamed with approval. Then the Imperium stands with you. Across the fleet, ships lit up as ancient war signals were transmitted, codes lost to history-activating systems older than most civilizations. Across the galaxy, hidden outposts, long-dormant ships, and warriors who had lived in exile for generations heard the call. The Imperium was no longer a memory. It was a reality. The Veilborn fleet arrived minutes later. Elliot stood on the command deck of the Vanguard, watching as space itself seemed to darken under the sheer number of enemy ships. They outnumbered the Terran fleet 20-1. This was not a battle. It was an execution. A single transmission came through. The same cold, inhuman voice as before. Last chance, heir of the Imperium. Surrender, and Earth will be spared. Silence filled the bridge. Every officer, every soldier, every person aboard the ship looked at him. Not at Reese. Not at Kalar. At him. Elliot stared at the vast enemy fleet. At the thousands, millions who wanted him dead. He was afraid. But something deeper had taken root inside him now. Something that hadn't been there before. Resolve. He reached out, pressing a single button on the console, broadcasting his voice across every fleet in range. My name is Elliot Carter. His voice, small but steady, echoed across the void. And if you think you can take me, come and try. The Imperium's war fleet arrived a heartbeat later. They did not come in scattered ships or desperate remnants. They came as a force that had been waiting for the right moment to remind the galaxy why the Imperium had ruled for millennia. A fleet larger than anything in living memory tore from the void, weapons already firing. The battle erupted in an instant. The Terran fleet fought harder than anyone expected, their ships dancing between enemy fire, striking with ruthless precision. The exiled legions descended with the fury of an empire reborn, cutting through veil-born ranks like blades through silk. Elliot stood at the center of it all, his heart pounding. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a strategist. But he was something far more dangerous. A symbol. And in that moment, the galaxy learned a truth it would never forget. The Imperium had returned, and humanity was now a part of it.